Hello, and welcome to In Search of Insight, Nootropic SIBO's monthly podcast. Emiel and I have been talking recently, and we realized that at the end of the day, we can take as many supplements as we want, try different extracts, and look for unique botanicals, but truly, the way to health and wellness is within. Therefore, the Nootropic SIBO podcast is no longer going to be focused on nootropics or plant extracts or really science of any nature, but finding inner harmony, peace, and balance. So, for that reason, we're going to start with a little guided meditation and a chant together. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, 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 Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, 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 Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Doesn't that feel better?
Yeah, I like this format a lot more.
Me too.
It's a lot easier for me too, because I don't really have to think. I can just swing this beautiful lion's mane around and listen to your singing bowl.
Lion's mane? You mean Yamabu Shiitake?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Well, now that we've shown the main event of the podcast, I guess it's probably a good moment to say, April Fools! This was our alternative way of welcoming you into the episode 43 of the Nootropic SIBO monthly podcast In Search of Insight. And we appreciate your sense of humor and understanding. The reason why we started this podcast with a small joke about Buddhism, inner peace, and balance is because today we're going to be talking about Hericium Erinaceus, which is better known by its common name in English, lion's mane mushroom. But there's a really strong and important link between lion's mane mushroom, its health benefits, and its origins and backgrounds. And today we're going to be talking about the historical uses of lion's mane from thousands of years ago to now. And we're going to talk about the variety of lion's mane products that Nootropic SIBO carries, and also a little bit more in depth into the lion's mane mushroom itself.
So, as Erika mentioned earlier, in traditional Japanese medicine, which is known as Kempo medicine, lion's mane, which this is a very nice, fresh example of it. It is a little bit old. We bought it on Saturday at the organic market in Amsterdam. There's a stall there with beautiful mushrooms, including always very nice lion's mane mushrooms. It was a little bit whiter when we bought it, but it is yellowed now. This is a bit of oxidation. We can touch on this a little bit later too, what might be causing some chemical changes in here when it gets a little bit yellowish. But Erika mentioned that this is called the Yamabu Shiitake in Japanese, and that name is based on a group of monks that live out in the mountains. They are the Yamabushi monks, and they follow a very intricate form of Buddhism that's being mixed with some traditional Japanese religions, and they're kind of hermits. They live out in the mountains, and they eat lion's mane to enhance their meditation practices. And I can totally see this, because a lot of our customers who like lion's mane like it for the effects that it makes them a little bit more calm. It makes them a little bit more grounded. It makes them maybe a little bit more introspective, which can make meditation easier. And clearly these monks also knew this, and it's been used for a long time. And in China, it's been used for a long time too. There it is called Hao Tao. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I'm not totally sure. For anyone out there that's curious about the spelling, it's spelled Houtou. So Hutu or Hao Tao, I'm not totally sure. And that translates to monkey head. So maybe it kind of looks like a monkey head. And then in more Western cultures, we refer to it as lion's mane because it kind of looks like a lion's mane. And another name for it, there's actually a lot of really interesting names around this mushroom. And cross-culturally, there's a lot of different names. And part of the reason for that is that lion's mane grows all over the world. In northern climates. So it's not going to be growing in any tropical climates. It's not necessarily going to be growing in any Arctic, really cold climates, but the kind of climates that most of the world is in, most of the northern world is in, those more temperate climates. Lion's mane is there. So there's a lot of countries that have some level of culture surrounding consumption of this mushroom. And that scientific name that Erika just mentioned, Hericium Erinaceus, Hericium stands for hedgehog, or it's in Latin, it's hedgehog. And that kind of comes from these little tendrils that you see. It's the hedgehog mushroom. Another fun name for it is the pom-pom mushroom.
Oh, I like
looks
that.
like a pom-pom.
Yeah.
I think that's the French name, pom-pom blanc, white pom-pom. So there's lots of different names for it.
But there is also a kind of general category for the type of mushroom that grows these tendrils.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you know the name for it. I totally miss it right now, but it starts with a T. And it has to do with the tendrils and sort of the teeth-like shape of the lion's mane mushroom. I might have to look this one up and get back to you at a later moment, because it describes a group of mushrooms and varieties that have this particular shape with small kind of protruding teeth that come out of it.
Okay.
But I'm lost.
I'm not sure. That being said, this is not the only Hericium species. So this is Hericium Erinaceus, the most common one, the one that you find on the supplement market, the one that has the most research on it. But interestingly enough, there are also other Hericium species that we at Nootropics Depot have been breeding ourselves in our little greenhouse that we have at the facility. And we've been extracting those and analyzing them. And some of these other Hericium species actually have very high amounts of bioactives too, and maybe some specialized bioactives. So one of those I actually was able to find at the market too.
Ooh, can I hold this one for you?
Yeah, you can hold this one.
It's dense, but it's not too heavy.
And then this is... It's a Hericium species. They are selling it as koraalzwam in Dutch. Which makes me think this is Hericium Corraloides. I wasn't able to get a confirmation on what it is. From what it looks like, it could be Hericium Corraloides, but it could also be Hericium americanum. I'm not 100% sure, but let's just say that this is Hericium Corraloides.
Just based on the appearance, it does
Kind
look
of
like
looks
coral.
like coral, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let me see if I can get this one close
That one
up
looks really good close up.
again. So yeah, this one also contains many of the same bioactives that are in actual lion's mane, Hericium Erinaceus, in addition to some other compounds like corallosin, which is very closely related to some of the compounds that are in lion's mane, like the hericinones. And there just isn't that much research about this one. But from what we've analyzed, similar bioactives, maybe some unique stuff. The one thing about it, can you hand that one to me?
Yeah.
It's just they're about the same size, but this one is definitely much heavier than this one. And that's also something you really have to think about when you're thinking about selecting maybe a lion's mane that is better. And better in what sense? Better in making bioactives or better in making biomass? Because if I have, let's say, this mushroom that weighs maybe 25% less than this, but they're kind of the same size, they take up the same amount of size. If this one is making half the amount of bioactives as this one, then it's really not interesting. But even if it's making 25% more, the biomass difference, yeah, maybe you're still better off growing this one. But this is getting maybe a little bit technical. So we were planning to keep this episode a little bit more general.
For sure. And we've slid into talking about different lion's mane varieties that are useful for making extracts to take as a supplement. But if we think about it from more of a culinary perspective, it's also interesting to consider that you might want one or the other variety for a different type of dish. And when I'm looking at the Corraloides, what we think is the Hericium Corraloides, this one looks like it would be really good for making tempura because of the pieces, and there's a lot of space in between. And one thing I also noticed is when you took that one out of the bag, I got a really strong odor, a really strong smell of mushroom compared to this one, which didn't have quite as strong of a smell to me.
To me it did,
Okay.
but I was closer to them when I took them out.
Fair enough.
Now that smell is kind of faded, they were in paper bags in the fridge for the last couple of days, and when I took them out, they had this kind of fresh, sweet, almost like aniseed-like aroma to them. It's really nice.
Hey, speaking of aniseed and fresh and sweet things, let's make ourselves a fresh cup of Mushroom Magic coffee, because as you guys know in the podcast, we always like to take a Nootropics Depot product to show you a new product, to really experience it for ourselves during the podcast, to give it kind of a vibe. And in this case, we're going to be drinking the Mushroom Magic coffee to switch it up. Of course, you know, matcha is our favorite, but the coffee is going to be really nice. It has a little bit of caffeine, and it also has lion's mane in the mushroom mix. So that's the reason why we decided to go for this product. So I will mix some of that up for us. Keep chatting about the mushrooms.
Before we do that,
yeah,
we are actually also going to be taking these.
Oh,
we're just going to eat them raw.
Okay.
And then we can also see, maybe there's actually a flavor difference between these.
How many grams are we going to eat raw? The whole thing or a part?
This would be a lot. This is, as you can see, quite a lot. I bought these also because we like eating this, which let's have a quick little discussion about that.
Sure.
Why is lion's mane so popular? It's because it tastes good. And you can find it growing quite easily in certain parts of the world, and they get quite big, so you get quite a lot out of it. And if you slice this one up, especially, I've never cooked with this one, so this is going to be a new experience. We're going to eat a little bit of it raw, see how it tastes like. Maybe we notice some interesting effects. Because, as some of you might know, I'm not a very strong responder to lion's mane, which is why I don't necessarily take a whole lot of lion's mane. Although we have been taking Erinamax daily for the last couple of weeks, so we'll touch on that in a little bit. But the only time I've ever had a really significant effect with lion's mane was when Mike from Southwest Mushrooms, you should look up his YouTube channel. He has some really good mushroom growing content.
And I'll link it in the description as well.
Definitely do that. He came into our office to show off some fresh lion's mane. And up until this point, lion's mane in fresh form really wasn't that popular. I don't think I'd ever seen it fresh. And here comes this guy with a huge box full of them. I don't think Paul had seen them either. So we were really excited about it. And we asked him, can we just eat it raw? And he said, yeah, and he just handed us something maybe half the size of this, but a fistful. And Paul and I ate the whole thing kind of like an apple. And I had significant effects after that. Really calm effect, focused effect, slightly psychoactive. I thought that was really interesting. I've never really achieved that again. I'm also not going to sit here and scarf down this whole mushroom because it's going to take a while. But let's have a couple of bites of these.
Yeah.
Let's see if we feel anything. And then as a backup option, we're just going to be drinking the Mushroom Magic coffee latte for 2 reasons. It's a little bit earlier in the day. I skipped my afternoon coffee, so I kind of need a coffee. It's nice to sip on something. And we can talk a little bit about the different formulations of lion's mane and why we went with just a non-extract in the normal coffee ones and then extracts in the baller editions. But
awesome.
Without further ado, you want to start with this one?
Sure.
Just like rip a piece off, I guess.
Okay.
And,
okay, so here we go.
So for me, it's easy. I'm just going to kind of rip one of these tendrils off.
And for me, I'm going to grab a little bit of a chunk of this. It almost reminds me of jackfruit on the inside.
Yeah.
So.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Tastes good.
There's a lot of water in it. It's not juicy because it's kind of spongy. But as I chew, I feel the water kind of releasing in like spurts almost.
Definitely an umami taste.
Yeah. I'm almost getting a little bit of like parsley. But also, yeah, it's quite meaty. Honestly, it's really tasty raw. Surprising. And it's ever so slightly spicy.
I'm getting that with this one too. You want to switch?
Let's switch. So, if you were wondering, can you eat raw mushrooms? The answer is a resounding yes.
But these are obviously being grown in a very controlled environment and just in a lab environment. They're super clean. There's going to be no contamination there. So totally fine to eat this raw. Also, that one is really spicy.
Yeah.
Maybe this one is too, but this one is really starting to tickle in the back of my throat, kind of peppery.
Same. Okay.
So here's my piece,
Here's
your
my piece.
Cheers.
Number
Let's
2.
see if there's any taste difference.
Yeah.
That one is stronger in flavor.
Hericium Corraloides, we think. Interesting that you said that. For me, the flavor isn't as strong because the texture takes center stage. I really like the texture of this one. This one, it's super dense, and I really feel the moisture inside of the mushroom. Whereas this one is light and fluffy, and those hairs make it pleasant, and that mushroomy flavor doesn't actually come through as much for this kind of funky one.
Yeah, this one's more mushroomy.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That one's not as mushroomy, a bit drier. Are you getting the spicy thing with this one?
Yes, I'm definitely getting the spicy thing.
Is it more spicy?
No, but it could be that I'm just used to it and I'm expecting it now, so my
Yeah.
expectations have changed.
It also takes a little bit to develop.
Okay, now I'm getting it. Now it's like in the back of my throat. Oh, interesting. This one, the traditional lion's mane, this felt spicy as soon as I was biting into it. But this one, that spiciness is taking a little while. Once I've swallowed it, then it starts getting spicy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what's causing that. That could be the bioactives. A lot of those bioactives are terpenoid type compounds. Compounds that could be a bit volatile, could have a bit of spiciness. Yeah, interesting. So there are probably some terpenes in here. That's what's causing the smell. Some level of esters is probably also in the smell. That could be causing some of the spiciness. Or it could be the bioactives, which are diterpenes. Like the hericinones. Erinacenes are not in here. For that, we need to go into the mycelium. So let's put these mushrooms down.
Yes.
We're going to have a delicious dinner from these. And to kind of come back a little bit there, this is obviously being consumed for a really long time. If you look back even 1400 years ago in some of the Chinese materia medicas, there's already references of it. These mushrooms have been growing for a really long time. If you see this hanging off of a tree, and they get much bigger, like they could be like this big. I've seen some really, really big examples that weigh like 10 kilos or something like that. Really big, heavy mushrooms. You would be interested, and you would probably try and eat it. And you would then be greeted with a really delicious flavor. These are really good mushrooms. I'm not a huge fan of that classic mushroom flavor, and to be honest, if I was eating just a normal mushroom here completely raw, I'd maybe be gagging a little bit because that's not my type of flavor. But this doesn't necessarily have that. It's not that mushroomy. It has a really nice texture, and if you cut it like this, just make slices of it, it's kind of like a steak, like a cauliflower steak kind of idea, and you just grill it in a pan, and it's so good that even one of the best restaurants in the world, Noma, they had this on their menu a couple of times in barbecued form. There's some other Michelin star restaurants that do stuff with lion's mane, and of course those restaurants are using lion's mane because it is also really expensive. All of this lion's mane together from the market was 23 euros already. So that's really expensive. Also kind of puts into perspective how cheap actually lion's mane supplements can be.
Absolutely.
And there's various reasons for that. I think one of the reasons why it's so expensive over in the Western world is that it's a unique mushroom. Not a whole lot of people have heard about it. There isn't a whole lot of supply. There isn't a whole lot of demand. So you can just kind of ask whatever you want for it.
There isn't so much of a standard of what it's supposed to cost in the Western world because people are still discovering it. And it is popular within the nootropics community, but
Very popular.
just for the general population, I think if you were to ask somebody, what is this thing? it might be hard to give an actual answer.
Absolutely. And it is also really popular in the home growing world, which is where I have dipped my toes into quite a bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
I have grown quite a bit of just normal lion's mane. I have not personally grown this, the Hericium Corraloides, although we are growing that now at the facility in a tent that I kind of put together right before we left the US. But it's quite an easy mushroom to grow. It grows relatively quickly. It seems to not be super prone to contamination. So I had a lot of fun growing this. A lot of people are having a whole lot of fun growing this. But at the end of the day, the masters, I think, still are in China. And that's where we source a lot of our lion's mane from. And we get many comments from people that our lion's mane works better than pretty much everyone else's. I don't want to make that claim necessarily for really high quality, small batch, artisan grown stuff in the US, but that's just not necessarily realistic because there isn't that much supply for it. You can kind of buy it in small amounts here and there. For a more commercial supply, a lot of it is coming from China, and there's some really, really good mushroom farmers in China. And the way we grow lion's mane in the Western world is you take grains and some sawdust, you put the spores on there, they germinate, they make mycelium, and then you take that mycelium rich initial substrate of grains and sawdust, and then you mix that with something that can hold on to a lot of water. Some cocoa coir, some nitrogen sources like soybean hulls, and some more sawdust to hold on to some more moisture and to provide some of the building blocks. And then you mix it all together. You put it in a bag or a bottle, and you let it completely colonize. That mycelium will spread through your substrate. And then you make a cut into the bag, and then the lion's mane grows out of that cut. This is what you call an artificial log growing.
And the reason why you need to make an artificial log is because in nature, mushrooms are going to be growing on and around trees and specific tree varieties. And mushroom varieties have preferences. Not every mushroom variety grows on every type of tree and in every type of environment. So some mushrooms prefer a slightly warmer and drier environment. Other mushrooms prefer a slightly wetter and perhaps darker environment, maybe closer to the ground or higher up in the air.
Let me stop you a little bit there. There aren't a whole lot of mushrooms that like a dry environment. That is why it is hard to grow mushrooms, because you need to maintain a high humidity level. This is also why it's sometimes hard for these to just grow out in the open in nature.
Because it's too dry. But
too dry.
I do want to defend my point, because sometimes when we go mushroom hunting, we go searching for mushrooms, not necessarily to eat, but just to find different varieties in the Netherlands. It can be difficult to find mushrooms in really, really damp and wet areas because we have so much water here, and in some areas of the forest water can gather, and
that they don't like being
on
on
the
the
base
water.
of the trees.
Yeah.
That's usually where we look for mushrooms. But if it's been really, really rainy and there's a whole lot of standing water, then there's likely no actual fruiting mushrooms during that super wet season.
Absolutely. And mushrooms grow either from the ground, from a tree, from a living tree, from a dead tree, and there's lots of different names for that. The name for a mushroom that grows on a dead tree is called a saprophyte, and this is a saprophyte. Although, if there is a living tree with kind of a gash on it, a knurl, some sort of damage, it can grow out of there. And I think that's kind of interesting with these artificial logs that we're making, these bags. In order to initiate fruiting, we make a cut on them, and it grows out of the cut, which is a little bit different compared to other species of mushrooms. We call those top fruiters. You just open the bag and they kind of grow up like a normal kind of stem and cap type of mushroom that we're more used to. You see here, there's a little nub, and it's actually quite dense here. And then it's brown, and you can actually see some sawdust on it. So this is where they would have made a cut, and that cut was probably, not very big, actually. This is a pretty decent cut, but it's still quite small. So out of a hole that size, this whole thing came.
Impressive.
And that's how it works. So also, if you have like a cut on a tree, it will just come out of that cut in the tree, and will just be hanging on a tree like this.
This cut is a little bit bigger.
That one's actually quite large.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how they were growing that. Maybe that almost looks like they punched a hole through it. When I grew them, I was growing through really little slits, and there was a tiny little bit here. And even if there was just the tiniest little prick or hole that you accidentally made, you could get huge fruiting bodies through there. So that's really unique. But that's how it grows, and you have to mimic that when you grow them in a lab. Another way you could do it is you can just take logs and you can inoculate those logs with lion's mane mycelium. And when you do that, then those logs, it takes a while. It can take up to 2 years, but then they start producing quite a bit of lion's mane. And that's really interesting because outdoor cultivation at the end of the day, in my opinion, is the best. And I think that's still why the Chinese growers are some of the best out there, for a multitude of reasons. When I'm growing mushrooms at home, there is quite a bit of energy input already. I have to run a humidifier, I have to run some fans, I might have to put a little light on it to maintain a perfect environment. I'm using a decent amount of water and electricity for that. If I can just do it outdoors, then it's all passive. I don't necessarily have to do a lot. So in that sense, it's more ecologically sustainable. And this is how they grow a lot of mushrooms in China for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is these areas might not have as many water power hookups, things like that. You just want to do it a little bit more passive. You want to do it with lower input costs and things like that. And then you can just kind of mimic a forest environment. And there's some researchers at Cornell, and I didn't know this is a thing, but there's something called forest farming, where you have a piece of land, you plant trees on there for the timber industry. But as those trees are growing, you have this big plot of land that nothing is really happening with that big plot of land. So you can start cultivating things there under the canopy of the trees that you're growing. And you create a little microclimate because you're basically making a tent. And the humidity is staying in that tent, in that canopy a little bit better. So they did some research on that. It was harder than they thought it was, but after 2 years, the lion's mane, just pieces of wood, really big, just chopped up trees, they started producing big lion's mane.
Amazing.
And I'm quite curious, this research seems like it's ended, but I'm quite curious to compare an outdoor grown lion's mane to an indoor grown lion's mane. You have a bit of UV light, you have more extreme changes in temperature outdoors, you have more extreme changes in humidity, you have bacteria, yeasts, and just things that are normally out in the air that pose a threat to our lion's mane, and the lion's mane has to fight that off then.
Might I infuse a tiny little bit of ancient wisdom by also mentioning that all of these different factors, sunlight, water, trees, ground, wind, insects, diseases, these are all a natural part of life. These are all things that exist out in the world, which is living and active, and not necessarily things that are going to be found inside of a lab. And if we just take a super basic and ancient wisdom inspired approach, growing food outside just makes sense, because outside has everything that we need. We have water, we have sun, we have the substrate, the wood that actually feeds the nutrients to the mushroom, and it makes sense that if you can grow it outside, you're going to get good benefits. However, it's also going to be a little bit wild, just like nature, and not as easy to control, and it might take longer and considerably more effort depending on the environment that you're trying to grow your mushrooms in.
Absolutely. So that's hard. But if you're in the right climate, yeah, there is maybe some arguments to be made for growing lion's mane on a log, kind of how nature intended it to. Which I feel like if you work more closely together with nature, you usually get better results, unless you really push it in a different way. Erinamax is not the fruiting body, it is the mycelium. And this is where things get a little bit complex. If you've been around the mushroom space for a long time, you will know about fruiting bodies versus mycelium on grain. There is a lot of research on mycelium, and mycelium being really positive for lion's mane, because the mycelium creates a completely different class of compounds called the erinacines. And the Erinacines have a lot of research on them because the Erinacines enhance nerve growth factor synthesis, NGF. And that underlies a lot of the benefits of lion's mane. So clearly, a lot of people have been hyper-focused on the mycelium, and another reason why you might want to be hyper-focused on the mycelium is because you can basically skip the fruiting stage, which is putting it in a bag with substrate and cutting it and letting the fruit bodies form and harvesting them at the right time. For mycelium on grain, you basically take a grain like brown rice, for example, to take a leaf out of Host Defense's book. If you look at the back of their label, you will see myceliated brown rice on the back of the label. And that's because what they're doing is they take the culture, the spores, and maybe you can make some liquid culture out of those spores, and then you can take that liquid culture and you can put it on some grains, and then the mycelium will expand and it will munch on the nutrients that are in the grains, and it will digest some of it, and it will build some biomass. The thinking being that that biomass is highly beneficial and will contain the Erinacines. Well, spoiler alert, it doesn't contain the Erinacines. We have not found high levels of Erinacines in any of these mycelium on grain products. And I'm not saying mycelium on grain products are 100% bad. There might be some benefits to them, but there's just not a whole lot of research on them. And at the end of the day, what you're consuming is a bunch of brown rice with a tiny little coating of mycelium around the edge. Because if you've grown some mushrooms and you've ever made your own grain spawn, and you take the grain spawn out and you shake it really hard in the bag, you'll see all of that white go away basically, and then it just becomes normal grain again, and then it builds itself back up. So there's not a whole lot of mycelium. It's probably something like 90% the grain and maybe 10% mycelium. So what if you want higher amounts of mycelium, and what if you want that mycelium to actually produce Erinacine A? Then you have to do something called submerged cultivation.
So, spoiler alert, the mycelium is not going to be growing on rice or grain in this case. Correct. It's going to be growing in
a broth. And for this, of course, you need a whole lot of science, and this is going very far away from nature. So we can do something really unique here with a lot of human intervention, but that also makes it really hard. So what we do, what our partners do, I've done this myself actually in our little mushroom lab that we had at home. That's where we got some of our first Erinacine A from actually in the lab. I made some liquid culture at home and then brought it to the lab and they extracted it, and there was tiny little amounts in it, so I got a little bit. But it's quite hard because you basically have to expand. So you take the spores of the lion's mane, you culture them out on something like an agar dish, a petri dish with agar-agar in it. It's kind of a jelly-like substance from seaweed, and it becomes solid, and in that solid, it kind of becomes like a big gummy almost. And in that big gummy, you can put some nutrients, and then the spores can grow on there, and then you can take the mycelium that's growing on that agar dish and so then you take the mycelium that's on that agar dish and you can transfer it to a broth solution that has sugars in it, a nitrogen source in it, various different types of minerals adjusted to a proper pH. It's quite a complex formula. And then you culture that for a short amount of time, and then you take that and you transfer it to a larger volume of that liquid culture broth. And then you culture that up. And then you take that and you put it in an even bigger volume. So you kind of just scale it up. And every time you scale it up, that reaction goes a bit faster and a bit faster and a bit faster, which seems to be important because you need to do it very quickly. So you need to create a lot of biomass that's very happy, has the nutrients it has, so that the biosynthetic machinery within that biomass, within that mycelium, can produce Erinacine A. We pulled that off. In here we have 0.5% of Erinacine A. It's on the back of the label here. But we're going to bump it up pretty soon to 1% because we've tweaked the process a little bit together with the partner, and they figured out a way in which to produce a little bit more Erinacine A. But that's quite a unique process. It has very little to do with that natural process. It's basically as far away from nature as you can get. No one in history ever really took Erinacine A before Erinamax was on the market a couple of years ago. And now a ton of people have had significant doses of Erinacine A in their system, which is interesting. Of course, in scientific research, people have been dosed with Erinacine A enriched mycelium. It's been there in the scientific world. It just hasn't been there in the commercial world. All of the different Lion's Mane mycelium products that we tested didn't contain significant amounts of Erinacine A. 0.5% still doesn't seem like a whole lot, and we are hoping to make it better. But 0.5% is already hundreds of times higher than what we see in other mycelium products. So this actually contains Erinacine A. It also contains things like Erinacine S, Erinacine E, Erinacine C. We just don't have the reference standards for that yet. So hopefully in the future we will have those, we can test for them, and then the picture changes. It's going to be a lot more than just 0.5% of Erinacine A. But we really like this. We've been taking it now. Well, this is a 120 count bottle. We're almost done. So for the two of us, we've almost been on this for a month.
If some of this technical information is going a little bit above your head, I'm going to simplify it a little bit and just say it's fascinating that we have access to a supplement like Erinamax because, like Emiel said, some of the reference standards are literally not available for the other Erinacines that are likely contained within Lion's Mane, which means that this product is really on the cutting edge of Lion's Mane products on the market. So if you're curious about Lion's Mane and you're curious about reaping the benefits of that NGF, that nerve growth factor, promoting quality of Lion's Mane, you should definitely try Erinamax because this is a super unique product. And the more that Nootropics Depot learns about Lion's Mane and the more research that we do in the lab, the more ideas we have to develop. But at the end of the day, we can only develop so far until we get the reference standards to confirm that the quality of the supplement is what we expect from all of our products. And sometimes progress can take a lot of time and a lot of effort, and other times it can be quick. So it's amazing to be able to see the actual Lion's Mane mushroom and then to look at a product like Erinamax, and we know the background, all the work and research that went into creating this product because, well, you've been along every single step of the way. But for anybody who has been following along with Lion's Mane research and Lion's Mane development and the development of supplements, Erinamax is a really exciting product. And I'm looking forward to the other Lion's Mane products that Nootropics Depot comes out with in the future, because for me, Erinamax is quite effective and I do sense a perceptible benefit. And I wanted to switch gears for a second to talk about the perceptible benefits of the fresh mushroom, because I'm actually feeling quite a lot right now.
So that's interesting because I was about to interrupt you and say, I'm feeling something.
Yes.
I'm like very clearly feeling something, and I'm feeling something that I haven't felt since that last time that I ate a large amount of Lion's Mane. That time I ate way more, it was way stronger, but this is also strong, which is interesting because even with Erinamax, which you feel Erinamax pretty strongly.
I do.
I don't feel Erinamax that strongly acutely. I feel it's more strongly than other Lion's Mane products. Over time, I've definitely now noticed, okay, there are definitely some nerve support effects. There are also some memory enhancement effects and some mood enhancement effects. It's great. It's just not that noticeable acutely. Whereas for a lot of people it is. But there's something in this fresh that produces an effect that nothing else really does.
No.
And I can almost still feel that spiciness in my stomach now, which I do think is really interesting to talk about, go a little bit back into what was it used for traditionally, because I don't actually think we've touched on that.
No.
People ate it, people made decoctions of it, people made powders of it, people probably made some low-tech extracts of it. And it was specifically oftentimes used for gastrointestinal health, which is nice because it actually does feel a little bit comforting.
Agreed.
Gastrointestinally. That is something I've never gotten with dried Lion's Mane, but dried Lion's Mane has a very high content of beta-glucans, and because of that, it's a really good prebiotic. So
I want to investigate this a little bit. Nerve growth factor. This is what kind of compound is nerve growth factor?
It's a neurotrophic factor. It's kind of like almost a protein type thing.
Okay, so it's not a neurotransmitter.
It's a neurotrophic factor.
Okay.
It doesn't act like a neurotransmitter. It does act on receptors. So, for example, NGF, nerve growth factor, activates specifically an enzyme or a receptor called TRKA. Blanking on the full name, I think it's tropomyosin kinase A, TRKA. BDNF, that's another one that we talk about often. That's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's one of the other neurotrophic factors. And BDNF specifically activates the TRKB receptor. And then there's also the TRKC receptor, and it gets a little bit more complicated. Mm-hmm. But yeah, NGF activates that TRKA receptor, but because TRKA is also controlling other neurotransmitter systems, specifically norepinephrine is one system that's being controlled by the TRKA receptor, there might be some neurotransmitter modulation effects that are happening. And you do see that in research that lion's mane can enhance noradrenaline levels. That might also be why, for some people, it makes them a little bit nervous. And maybe this is also a good time to address, since we're kind of talking about GI and noticeable effects. Some people also have really negative effects with lion's mane, and that's important to address. We don't want to say that lion's mane is perfect for everyone. It is generally seen as very safe. We've been selling it for a long time and have reported minor issues with some customers, like some gastrointestinal upset, but nothing crazy. And it's our best-selling mushroom product by far. It's probably the best-selling mushroom product on the market, just generally. Yet there does seem to be a big group of people who get more severe issues with it. And we talked about this with Joshua, the inventor of the Mr. Happy Stack, recently, and he was saying that lion's mane is a strong biofilm disruptor. We did some research on this. That is actually the case. Biofilms are these films that bacteria make, and the bacteria can hide in those films and go undetected from your immune system, from your entire body. But they're still there, they're still releasing, they're causing some low-level chronic issues. Bad. Now, when you take a biofilm disruptor like lion's mane, and there's some other supplements that do it, but lion's mane seems to be quite strong in it, then that biofilm dissolves, and all of that bad stuff that was hiding in that biofilm and releasing over time and causing low-level chronic issues now releases full force and makes you feel really awful for a little bit, and then it should improve again. I don't want to recommend that people do that to themselves. If that happens to you, stop. Take a second to think, maybe check out with a doctor, maybe see if you can get some sort of analysis of your GI system. It would be good to pay some attention to that, but that is maybe why some people are having issues with it, because it is a strong ingredient for your gastrointestinal system, acting as a prebiotic, acting as a biofilm disruptor. And that's where a lot of the research is into, in the polysaccharides. So beta-glucans are the polysaccharides too. And the polysaccharides are basically just fermentable sugars, and there's a lot of it in lion's mane. But clearly, as Eric and I are now exhibiting symptoms of some sort of effect happening, that is not coming because of the polysaccharides or the beta-glucans. That's too fast of an effect. That has to be coming from an active compound that's absorbing and crossing our blood-brain barrier and making us feel a certain way. And lion's mane is chock full. Too. Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing. I feel energized. I feel more clear-headed. I feel like it's easier to form thoughts and to have a conversation. It's easier to follow along. The general pace of our conversation also feels like it's getting a little bit faster, which typically happens on a podcast, but not always in this way, not always in this relaxed way. And that was from 2 relatively small pieces of fresh lion's mane. So if you're curious to try this, and if you have access to high quality lion's mane that's being grown in, a trusted environment from a trusted vendor, definitely give it a try. Try it fresh, because it's pretty fascinating to feel effects from a fresh mushroom like this, especially when most of the time when we're talking about mushrooms, we're talking about extracts and we're dealing with capsules or powders or sometimes solutions. Yeah. But in this case, it's really just coming from, as close to nature as we can get, the fresh mushroom itself.
Which I think is also illustrates a concept that we're always up against, is that when you're processing a mushroom, whether that is drying or extracting it, things will be lost. If you want to experience something in its full potential, the most full spectrum, you basically need to eat it fresh. And for lion's mane, that seems to have a unique property, and I would recommend everyone try it out. It's the same for something like kava. Like fresh kava, I've heard, has a very different effect than dried kava.
I would like to infuse just another moment of ancient wisdom and say that what you're saying about an extract, that you can have an extract and reap benefits from a particular active compound, but you will lose something, does reference a kind of general rule of nature specific to some world religions, but definitely to Buddhism, which talks about balance and the fact that life and death are in balance with each other. I won't go too deeply into this direction because I am not Buddhist myself, but I do have some friends, shout out Esther, who have really been warm and welcoming in sharing information and wisdom of Buddhism that definitely resonates for me in everyday life. And when we talk about mushrooms, and when I think about the experience that I have when I take mushroom products, I feel relaxed, I feel present, I feel active, and I do feel balanced. And I feel like for people who relate to these more general or holistic qualities of supplements, and that's really what you're looking for, lion's mane is a really nice mushroom to study because there's a lot of amazing stories and amazing history about the use of lion's mane throughout time, as far as recorded time goes. And I think it's amazing that we're still taking this product and that we can innovate with it even now, even after all these thousands of years of use.
Absolutely. And part of that innovation, of course, are these mushroom magic drinks, which just make it really convenient to add a lot of mushrooms to your daily life, your stack, whatever it may be. And we said we were going to drink some of these. I'm actually really satisfied with the effects of the fresh one.
I am too, although I am craving the flavor.
Yeah, because this is the coffee latte, which is really a dessert. This is the Mushroom Magic Baller. The only reason I pulled this one up is because this one contains our lion's mane 8-1. Alright, so a little bit of the normal Mushroom Magic Coffee Latte. So not the Baller edition, just the normal one. And this one just has the lion's mane 1-1, basically just dried lion's mane. We do one other process where we basically cook the lion's mane, and that breaks down some of the chitin in it. It's the cell wall of the mushroom, and it's hard to digest. So by boiling it a little bit, you can break that down, and most of, if not all of the bioactives should still be unharmed with that short boiling. And that's how we create this lion's mane. It's not an extract, it's not a dried powder. I'm not totally sure what to call it. It's a processed, dried, whole, lossless lion's mane. Let's just call it that. And then, of course, in the Mushroom Magic Baller, all of the editions, this is the matcha, but in all of the Baller editions, we go with extracts to have a little bit of a stronger effect. In this one, we have the lion's mane 8-1 extract, so that just means we use 8 kilos of mushroom and then we end up with 1 kilo of final extract, 8 condensing into 1. And for that, we're using 2 different solvents: water to extract the water soluble compounds, and ethanol, alcohol, to extract the ethanol or alcohol soluble compounds. And then those 2 extracts are combined and dried, and then you have some preservation of the water solubles, a much higher concentration of those ethanol solubles, which seem to be more of those bioactive compounds that are crossing the blood-brain barrier and producing more of an acute effect. And the 8-1 is really one of those lion's mane extracts that people come to us for because it has a strong effect. You notice it right away, except for me. There are some non-responders, but most people, they take it and right away they feel a really nice effect. Maybe similar to what I'm feeling from this fresh lion's mane. That would be amazing. If our products are producing this effect for most people, go out and buy yourself some lion's mane now, because now that I'm feeling this, I'm almost shooting myself in the foot, because I experienced this 5 years ago with the fresh lion's mane, or maybe even longer, 6 years ago. And it's been 6 years of not doing that, even though I've had fresh lion's mane many times. We've just been cooking it.
Yeah.
Haven't been eating it like this. So I think I'm going to go to the market and start buying some fresh lion's mane to just eat throughout the week. But anyways.
That'll be your special fancy treat from the mushroom ladies.
Yes.
I don't know what the name of their stall is, but if you ever happen to visit Amsterdam, you should go to the Noordermarkt. That's a organic market where they're selling vegetables and cheese and eggs and seafood and meat and mushrooms. There's an amazing stall, and they have an incredible variety of cultivated but also wild foraged mushrooms. They have mushroom powders, and it's really fun to be able to see so many different kinds of mushroom varieties in person and to really just get a feel for the world of mushrooms and how much difference there is between even different cultivars of the same species and different times of year, the mushrooms that come into season. We always look forward to the chanterelle mushrooms because they're super, super tasty with pasta. But lion's mane is definitely a nice mushroom to use even for like a main dish or a side. It has a super intense and meaty flavor, and this makes it really nice for cooking. But it also is really nice in the coffee and the matcha drinks as well.
Yeah, and some people say it's kind of like the lobster of the forest because it tastes kind of like lobster, crab. I honestly don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. For me, it doesn't have I guess maybe lobster would be the closer one because it doesn't have quite that sweetness that I associate with crab, but it definitely does have a richness that I maybe associate more with lobster. But for those of you who don't eat meat or fish, you've probably been eating mushrooms for a long time because mushrooms have been around in the more alternative, even hippie food scene for quite a long time to use as a meat substitution. And we do that from time to time as well, but mushrooms are honestly delicious on their own, not even as a substitution for meat, but just as the main event.
And that being said, as a meat substitute, lion's mane is probably one of the best ones.
Totally.
Okay, I'm gonna make a bit of noise. Okay.
So, now we have our Mushroom Magic Coffee Latte. This is going to be a nice little boost before editing the podcast.
And before joining a meeting where we discuss new products, new stacks, and maybe I'll bring up this fresh lion's mane thing again, because how can we preserve that effect but not have to eat just raw lion's mane? Because to be honest, it's a fun experience, but I'd much rather take a capsule.
And I would imagine that, we might be on the adventurous side when it comes to eating raw mushrooms. Mm-hmm. So in that case, for those of you who want to go for something a little more traditional, Mushroom Magic Coffee Latte.
But just because I'm really into this effect now,
Emiel's going to go in for a second dose.
Do you want some more too?
I'm going to pass for now. I'm honestly feeling super satisfied by what I ate. Okay. That's a nice solid piece.
This is a big piece. I kind of have a feeling that, and I'm just basing this on the spiciness, but that this one is producing the most effect.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think you might be right. And you know what? This is probably a perfect moment to just incorporate a little final ancient wisdom and illustrate the fact that what you feel and your sensations when you're taking a product, it could be Mushroom Magic Coffee Latte, it could be Erinamax, it could be the Lion's Mane 8-to-1, it could be Lion's Mane 1-to-1. There's so many different Lion's Mane products that Nootropics Depot carries. But when you sense something has changed, when you take a supplement, when you sense that your mood has slightly shifted, when you sense that maybe you can see colors a little bit more vividly, or your breathing has calmed, and maybe your muscles feel a little bit more relaxed, trust those sensations. Because Emiel and I have been creating this Nootropics Depot podcast for the last 3 years, a little bit more, and throughout that time, we have tried so many different products. We have tried so many different combinations, new products, beta testing, different types of formulas, and over the years, we have become sensitive to the effects of supplements, so sensitive that we can even compare and contrast our different individual responses to the same product. And over the years, we've also learned a lot about the things that each other likes, the things that, stand out to me in a product versus the things that stand out to you. But it's really personal, and it's honestly something that you have to experience for yourself, and that you have to give yourself time to really develop a sense of what has changed, if anything at all, and if that change is pleasant. Is this at a level that I like? Am I curious to try a different dose? Or do I want to just keep kind of cruising at that certain level and make the supplement work for you? And I think this is really based on the fact that the supplements that we talk about on the podcast are designed to improve your life and improve your health, and also to help you feel good. And I feel really, really good after eating this raw lion's mane, but I also feel really good drinking a sweet and tasty coffee drink that I know contains a bunch of different super healthy and beneficial functional mushrooms, including lion's mane.
So let's bring it back to this fresh lion's mane for a sec, and the whole Yamabushi Taki monk thing that we introduced at the start. You're a bit more into the yoga scene and meditation things. Do you think this effect would help enhance the yoga flow, meditation?
Absolutely. For me, when I first took Erinamax and when I was taking lion's mane, what I noticed, the sensation that I got, it was very hard to describe with words. And for people who do yoga, or for people who meditate, for people who are spiritual or religious, there are some things that you can experience which are hard to describe with words. And even though I wasn't taking Erinamax for any other purpose than just to try it out as a product, that sensation that I had, that sensation of relaxation and calm and improved respiratory function and probably a slightly lowered heart rate and a little bit of energy and a little bit more awareness. I have all these words that I can use to describe it, but really it's that feeling. And I think this feeling of peace and relaxation is what I'm looking for when I go to a yoga class. It's also what I'm looking for when I take a moment to sit down and just focus on my breathing, which is my focus of meditation. I don't call myself a person who practices meditation, but I do spend a lot of time throughout the day just checking in and doing some just deep breaths, simple breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And the sensation that you get from these practices, from yoga, from meditation, from breathing, it is also strengthened and in a way mimicked by the lion's mane. Mm-hmm. And the lion's mane has a subtle but very broad effect. This is why it's a little bit to describe, and this is also why I think it might be difficult for you to sense it as well, because to be honest, these kinds of sensations are also things that you have to cultivate feeling for yourself. And if you're not into yoga, and if you're not into meditation, and these things don't interest you, then getting a feeling for that broad and subtle level of awareness and maybe slight, an up kicker and also relaxation, that balance of things, this is something that also takes a certain level of focus to just
for sure
become aware of.
And to be honest, that is a skill I've developed over time, which is also why sometimes I say something has a strong effect and then you guys try it and you're like, Emil's full of shit, it doesn't have that effect. But you also have to realize I'm kind of sitting on a couch, complete silence, in like a dark room, mm-hmm. just taking these supplements and trying to like meditate on the feeling that I'm feeling. And of course, it's amplified then because you're really focused on it. If I just take something and I go about my day, I don't experience that.
No.
So when you read my reports, just think about it in that sense.
I also have another theory, but this is more of a compliment. This is another theory I have. So for those of you who've been watching the podcast for a long time, you've probably gotten familiar with Emiel, his personality, and also his absurd intellect. But Emiel is one of the most relaxed people I have ever met in my entire life. And one of my theories with lion's mane and why I think maybe you're not responding to it in the way that other people do is because you are so relaxed already, you might as well be a monk. In fact, when Emiel was young and traveling through Southeast Asia, you traveled and visited a lot of different Buddhist temples. Mm-hmm. And I think you should tell this story yourself if you feel like sharing.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I think this was in Laos. I'm not exactly sure. I think it was in Laos. Or Myanmar, Burma. I'm not sure which is the correct name at this point, actually. I think it was Myanmar, Burma, actually. We went to a Buddhist temple there, and we were hanging out there and talking to one of the monks that was hanging out there, maybe one of the main ones. I'm not sure how their hierarchy works, but we've been to a lot of temples where you saw a lot of, like, Buddhist grunts in that sense, like large amounts of young guys. This guy was a little bit older, a little bit more senior, so probably had been in it for a while, and I think we were just talking and sitting and just...
And how old were you at the time?
Like 12 or so.
Okay.
And then at the end, he had a conversation with my parents, and he said, "You can just leave your son here. I think he'll fit in. He should join our Buddhist practice."
So Emiel was getting scouted by Buddhist monks at the age of 12. You already had the chill vibes at that time.
Probably, yeah.
It's a fun story to tell, but it's also really cool because you talk about how your experience with plants and botanicals as a kid, especially growing up for, a large portion of your childhood in Malaysia, that had a really big influence on your interest in botanicals, and then basically your journey to finding Nootropics Depot and to becoming product specialist and to your current job, which is researching and formulating products.
Yeah.
And experiences like these can be really formative, and not to say that this Buddhist monk has influenced your curiosity for lion's mane, but there's so much more in our environment that sometimes we're not aware of that can help kind of guide us into a specific path. This is where I start to get a little bit more spiritual with it, but it's highly likely that those Buddhist monks were probably eating lion's mane at one point or another.
Maybe, yeah.
We don't know.
Although I do have to say that this would have been in a much warmer climate, so probably not a native range for lion's mane.
Okay.
I feel like for something that specific for lion's mane, you have to be around an area where it just grows in the wild. Like in the mountains in Japan, which it's named after monks that live in the mountains, that are going out into the mountains, finding the Yamabushi-take, the lion's mane, and consuming it. So I do think, but if you look in Buddhism is an interesting religion for the fact that it does seem to be related to various different psychoactive compounds, and that enhances religious practices. And you see this in a lot of different religions and tribes. And if you look in South America, of course, we had Carry On, and we were talking about ethnobotany a few episodes ago, and that's of course how a lot of different cultures use plants around spiritual processes, spiritual practices, religions, whatever it may be. Oftentimes those are a little bit more psychoactively strong, so they create a bit of a vibe shift.
Yeah.
And that can help get you in the mood for meditation or reciting something with a lot of focus.
Or singing, dancing,
yeah.
Even eating. And another element too, if we're thinking about Christianity, for example, the use of wine could be for a vibe shift, but it could also be a practical need as well, because at certain points in time, alcohol was a safer choice as a beverage than water. And so there's also a practical element of, using the foods and the fruits and vegetables that grow in your environment that you experience a beneficial effect from, that you would share these with people, and that you would celebrate these things, or that you would use these things to celebrate perhaps a higher purpose or some grander kind of element of life, something, a value that you want to share with people around you.
And of course, in Western religion, and this is kind of interesting too, in these religions that we've talked about, it's more like the top people, the people meditating, they're consuming these psychoactive substances and enhancing their practices. But in more Western religions, if you walk into any big Catholic church in Europe or whatever, I'm not so well versed in religion, so I'm not sure what the differences are, but if you walk into a church, it always reeks of myrrh and frankincense. And that's because they're burning myrrh and frankincense in pretty high amounts. I think I was one time in the Amsterdam, and there was a concert happening there, or a concert, whatever you would call it in a religious context. They were singing, and they were swinging these balls around with burning myrrh and frankincense in there, and it was just completely filled with the vapors of these botanicals. And these botanicals, in modern research, contain compounds like insensyl acetate, which activate the TRPV3 receptor, just like our supercritical boswellia extract, and that definitely produces a psychoactive effect. So anyway, we're going off
down
topic,
a rabbit hole,
but
and it's super
I do
fun.
think it's interesting.
We could talk about this for so long, and as you can see, the Mushroom Magic coffee latte, as well as the fresh lion's mane, is definitely making things even more fun and exciting. Unfortunately, our podcast time has come to an end, so we have to say goodbye. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we sign off for the month?
Yeah, I guess if you've made it this far, I should also tell you that we are still very actively doing a lot of research and development on lion's mane, and we're getting somewhere now. We have some Hericinone reference standards. We can start doing some initial analysis, and this has revealed that there is definitely some optimization that can be happening behind the scenes in terms of processing, in terms of cultivation. So I think this is quite exciting. Of course, I think a lot of you expect that the results are quicker than they actually are. When I'm saying we're doing the research and it's positive, it could still be a few years before you can actually consume the fruits of that labor. But just rest assured, we are still doing a lot of lion's mane research. There is new products on the horizon. There are new products on the horizon. And that makes me really excited, especially now that maybe my interest in lion's mane has been piqued a little bit more after this experience with the fresh lion's mane. So I'm going to keep exploring that. Like maybe you could steam distill it. Maybe you'll see a steam distillation setup show up on video at some point. But for now, this was a nice episode, and I'm excited for this second batch of fresh Hericium Corraloides to kick in, and I hope you all have a great day, week,
month, year, eternity. The choice is yours. Until next time. Nam yo renge kyo, 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 nam yo renge kyo.